Hello and welcome back to ATA Live, or what I have taken to recently, informally at least, calling this Death and Taxes, the discussion of all things inevitable in life. My name is John Humphreys. I'm here with, as usual, my co-host, Gene Tunny. How you doing, Gene?
Excellent, John. How about yourself?
Top of the world, another beautiful day in paradise up here. And just for anyone who listened to the last time we chatted, where I answered that with talking about how stressed I was trying to sell the house, it looks like, alhamdulillah, we may have actually sold the house. So that is putting me in a much better mood. So
very good. In a good mood to talk about death and taxes.
Every day is a good day to talk about death and taxes, Gene. Every day. So the introductory stuff, this is put on by the Australian Taxpayers Alliance. Taxpayers.org.au. Go check us out, follow us, give us a like. If you have spare money, feel free to become a member. If not, then just check us out and follow us on the socials. That always helps. This is going to be simulcast to Facebook, X, and YouTube. Right, sorry, YouTube. I forgot you for a second there, but yes, Facebook, X, and YouTube. Facebook and YouTube through the Australian Taxpayers Alliance account. On X, my personal account. Whichever one you're looking at, please, can I ask you to stop, pause? Well, don't pause. Don't pause it right now. We're still speaking. But like this video, share this video. Let's get it flowing around the algorithms. And please go and find us on the other socials and give us a follow there. And if you can find Gene, give him a follow. And we've got a guest coming up today. And so maybe we'll ask Nicholas what his socials are so we can share them around so you can give him a follow as well. But that's enough for my intro, except to say, like I always say, we're live because there's always a mistake at the beginning. It's like I pre-plan these mistakes just to prove that we're live. But I forgot to mention, we're open to comments. So if you're watching along, if you like something, if you hate something, if you've got a question, a comment, you want to pay a compliment or throw a tomato, please feel free to put it in the comments. And we will try, time willing, to get to them, answer your questions. Feel free to ask questions of our guest as well. And we'll see where it goes. So we are in your hands, dear viewing public. With that said, I'm now going to take a bit more of a backseat in today's episode, and Gene is about to introduce our special guest for today.
Okay, thanks, John. Our special guest today is Nicholas Gruen, CEO of Lateral Economics. He's been described by Bernard Keane, political editor for Crikey, as a national treasure and public policy wonk. And also, he's been described by the economics editor at the Financial Times, Martin Wolf, as the most brilliant economist you have never heard of, which is a rather British way of complimenting someone. Nicholas, welcome to the program.
Hi, Gene. Hi, John.
Good to have you on the show.
I mean, I normally only speak to fellow national treasures, but I'm trying to be generous in this case. Either I'm talking to people who are not national treasures, and that's generous, or I'm assuming you are national treasures. But anyway,
John, I think we've just been settled on being the Queensland treasures, right, Gene?
Yes, Queensland treasures, the perfect state of origin treasures.
Absolutely. John actually does have a knighthood from Cambodia, I believe.
Very good. Yeah. So he should. He's done some great things in Cambodia.
Yes, it doesn't come with a sir, unfortunately, the Cambodian knighthoods. But I still run with it anyway. You can call me sir.
It's very good.
Very good. So, John, if you could put the first slide up, please. Nicholas, the first thing I'd like to ask you about is in your recent Substack, you had a great quote from Greg Kaplan, who's chair of E61 Institute. He's a professor at University of Chicago. This was at Allegra Spender's roundtable on tax.
Yeah, you may have to tell me what it was, but you go if you like.
Right. Essentially, the point is that he's pointing out that because of the various concessions and
the employees versus entrepreneurs tax
exactly
point. Yeah,
and so you could have the same income but vastly different tax rates, and he sees that what this is doing is it's leading to a misallocation of capital and talent in the economy. And I thought that was a rather, good insight. And I'm just wondering, what attracted you to that statement of Greg Kaplan's rather than say something Ken Henry or Chris Richardson would have said at the summit?
Well, look, the thing about what Greg had said was that it was full of information. It was full of analysis. It was light on the kind of moral, I don't know, the sort of pep talk stuff. And I'm sort of increasingly allergic to that for reasons we might even talk about later on when we talk about democracy. But I was just impressed. I mean, my default setting when I run into policy stuff is most stuff put out by think tanks is pretty bullshitty. I won't name names. I probably can be tempted to, but so you kind of scan around and there are some interesting things done, but they're all pushing. I mean, there's virtually no think tank in Australia, with the exception of Grattan, I suppose, that isn't pushing an ideological line, that doesn't start from a kind of knowing the shape of answers before the research starts. And E61 tries to do number crunching. And the thing that I was impressed with Greg Kaplan's work about was that he was showing how good the Australian tax system is if you ask the question, does it treat like people like, all the way up the income chain to the 95th percentile. And then whether you pay 20% tax or 48.5% or whatever it is now, that's kind of up to you. How much you push into capital gains, how much you put into super, all this kind of stuff that that our politicians of both political stripes have set up. And I thought that was a pretty useful thing to be pointing out. I mean, we kind of know it in a way, but this was really done. It was an impressive piece of work. It was using real data and all that kind of stuff. So that's really what I was reacting to. And yeah, I've got my doubts as to how useful. I mean, I suppose someone like Ken Henry plays a useful role as an elder statesman, but wagging the finger and saying our politicians should be think about the long term, all that stuff. Of course they should. And we've set up a system in which it's extremely hard for them to do so. And it's only exceptional politicians who do it and who survive doing it. And maybe we should be thinking a little more about how we could improve the system so that our politicians aren't playing this just miserable role, and it's miserable for them and it's miserable for us. It's increasingly obviously disastrous. And what we cling to is this idea that democracy, by which we mean the thing we've got at the moment, electoral democracy, is a terrible system of government. It's just better than all the rest. And I think that's a kind of cop-out, because there are ways to improve what we have and we're not focusing on them.
Got you. And go, John.
Before, because I hope we're going to get to a discussion of some of Nicholas's ideas for how to improve that. But before we go there, I was struck with your recent conversation with Bernard Keane, which was quite an enjoyable read and listen. For anyone who's not following Nicholas, you can go and find him on Substack and probably elsewhere. Nick, you can give yourself your own plugs. But there was some interesting conversations and articles there that do yourself a favor. Go check them out. The latest one, an interesting chat where you touched on this quite a bit with Bernard, talking about the terror of the incentives in our political system. And you pointed out, I think quite fairly, which is a lot of people make this kind of, oh dear, politics, it's broken. You make the point that it's not just because all politicians are bastards, they're also following their incentives of the system that we have. And there's something structurally at play here. It's hard to fix with just wishing ourselves a better quality of human.
Well, exactly. Go. Sorry.
Can I ask, going back a step, was it always this way? And if not, what has changed? It seems to me that something qualitatively shifted around, I don't know whether it was the 90s, I'd say, but perhaps. But I was probably too young to remember that firsthand, so I'm doing that off history books. So maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I've got this sort of getting old and saying, you know, back when I was a kid kind of mentality. But if it did change, why? Or did it not change? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a very good. Let me try and give you my simple answer to that, which is, I think in a whole lot of ways, I have lived through a golden age and I didn't know it at the time. But when economic reform came along in 1968, Max Corden said that all these economists that he was part of, my father was a fellow traveller, all these economists were demonstrating that tariffs, certainly high levels of tariffs that we had, were bad for Australia, but that this was a purely academic question because Australia's politicians would never do anything about that. 1968. So 5 years later, the problem is made 25% less bad with the stroke of a pen. Just 5 years later, that's 1973, and then you run the calendar forward to 1988, and it's all over. So why was it so bad in the first place? Because Australia had got itself into a position where various people turned up in Canberra. I think I should just inform you that one of them was Sir Charles McGrath, and he combined the roles of CEO of Repco, which was a Australian component manufacturer, and the chairman of the Australian Liberal Party, or at least the Victorian Liberal Party. And he successfully lobbied for local content plans to force everybody to not just make in Australia, which they would have continued to do, but to make more and more Australian cars with more and more Australian components, and they killed the industry by doing that. Now, the Department of Industry and Commerce that presided over this held meetings. And the issue with this was that you got a story to tell the people, which was this is helping make cars in Australia, and then you have a kind of a civil war between component manufacturers and assemblers, who are the component manufacturers are getting help from the local content plan, and that's driving up costs for the assemblers. And so they're constantly at war, and the bureaucrats have no idea what to do. And so they have meetings and they try and keep people happy. And the level of complexity rises and rises. And a nice high watermark was the non-reversion rule. Would you like me to tell you what the non-reversion rule was? You don't have any choice. I'm going to tell you. It was that if a car company had chosen to buy Australian components, if it wanted to revert to importing those components, it had to get the permission of the department, and that permission would not be given. That was the rule. Guess which Labor backbencher in 1974, when there was a revolt against the tariff cuts of Gough Whitlam and a ramping up in the introduction of quotas on cars, guess which backbencher insisted that the non-reversion rule remain in place?
Was it Keating?
Paul John Keating. Anyway, that's not an expose. That's a demonstration of how he changed his mind. But so I've discovered this. On one occasion, I hopped into the to DFAT, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, because they had that seemed to me their policy, what they were trying to do on intellectual property was completely incoherent. And I was, and a sort of senior-ish manager rang me up from DFAT and said, could she have a cup of tea with me? And I said, well, absolutely. And I thought I was going to get a bit of schmoozing, and could I please be a little less forthright in my comments? Anyway, she asked me, she said, so you say we've got no strategic idea of what we're doing. And then she said, well, what could we do to get a strategic idea of what we're doing? We ask one lot of people and they want us to put up intellectual property, and we ask another group of people and they want us to bring it down. How can we work out what to do? And I told her that economists had a way of looking at this, and while the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade didn't run foreign policy, the government did, this would give them a strategic overview of what things to, how to try and shape the discussion and shape the choices. And of course, she wasn't really interested in doing that. It was one of those questions that people ask and they don't really, when you tell them, they sort of want the answer until they find out what it is. And then they realize that's kind of more trouble than they're up for.
It sounds like she wanted to find an answer through averaging instead of find an answer through scrutinizing for the truth. Like, I say 2 + 2 is 4, you say 2 + 2 is 6, so the answer must be 5.
Yeah. So in our system, that is the default. And then there was this golden period where a discipline turned up and said, no, you've got it all wrong. At least with these things, tariffs, intellectual property, shopping hours, regulating what meals are served and what routes are served in civil aviation. That's a dumb idea. Just forget the whole thing. And then they bring the business community along with them. And then the union movement kind of this coalesces into what everyone thinks. And then you get this period where the rubbish gets cleared away, the detritus of beggar my neighbor favoritism, political favoritism and deal doing is kind of swept away. Then everyone gets carried away because they think, hey, we'll just deregulate things and that'll always work. And of course, the business community likes this. And politicians quite like it. It enables them to pretend that they're lowering the costs of roads when they're increasing the costs of roads. And they basically go headlong into all these really difficult economic policy questions without tackling them as if they're difficult. And they think that if it looks a bit more market friendly, it must be better, which is completely wrong with a PPP, a public-private partnership with privately funded roads, for instance. And so that's what that happened. And now we've sort of come through that process and we're back to this miserable equilibrium where no one's got much of a clue what to do. No one really cares that much. And John, you were talking about the incentives for politicians. And I think that's a somewhat invidious way to put it because it looks like they're sort of trying to make a bit more money or they're trying to get a few more votes. This is in the context of competition, and a much stronger way to look at it, I think, is that they don't really feel they have much of a choice because in the words of Jean-Claude Juncker, the Belgian politician, we know what the right thing to do is. We just don't know how to do it and get re-elected. And a politician's job is to be re-elected. We can be moralistic about that, but it's like turning up at a shop and expecting a just price or expecting them to, that line, sorry, lady, we're not a charity. It's just a category mistake. A politician, surely most politicians have to be concerned about winning elections. Otherwise, I
totally agree with that.
I
think too many people blame the player instead of the game. If you set up a game with a group of incentives and you see people following those incentives, it's a very first order level thinking to blame the people. It's blame the incentives if you didn't like their behavior.
Yeah, but my point is that these incentives are hard incentives. They're incentives with a cutoff that just says you're out of the game. That's why I'm happy to be moralistic about a politician who pursues their incentives without regard for the public good. Many of them feel they have no discretion. They have a very limited discretion to pursue the public good, and I think most of them try to do that.
The analogy that comes to mind there is
out on their ear if they don't. Sorry, go on.
The analogy that comes to mind would be a business in a competitive market being a price taker. They say, look, I want to charge double. I want to charge half. I can't. This is the price. It's out of my control. I can be the best person in the world, but this is the price.
There's a nice story.
Can I push back on this or play devil's advocate a little bit, or maybe just ask the question another way. But I agree with that a lot. The politicians seem to be hemmed in by the fact, and I thought you described this well with Bernard Keane, their incentive is make sure you don't say anything real, because anything real you say can be an attack ad the next day. You haven't got much upside politically from saying that real thing. Hold it in the back of your mind. Hope you can secretly do it later. You got no real incentive from saying that thing. You've got a lot of incentive to not. And so it seems we've had the dumbing down of politics. So it's sometimes said to me by friends in political spheres that, because I'm going off sounding like an economist, and they say, you got to dumb that down. And I'm saying, look, I think it's been dumbed down enough. I think it is well and truly dumbed down enough. But go back a bit, and there was some people saying brave things in the 70s, 80s, 90s, even if you think they're wrong. They were saying things that were going against the grain outside the current Overton window. They were trying to lead instead of follow the opinion. It's not apparent to me that wasn't true before that as well. It seems to me there was a lot more political bravery through nearly all of history in most of the democratic world before the late 20th century. And I wonder if there was a step change somewhere, or maybe a gradual change. And I take your point that there was a golden age. I think that was a golden age of brave people getting it right. But there were brave people previously coming up with lots of wacky ideas in lots of different directions. And I think we've got a total glut, a total shortage of bravery, political courage. And that's because they're following the incentives. But did the incentives change?
So let me give you my theory number 2. Remember how I said there was a sort of big grand one? This was the more bespoke one. So my larger theory, which it might be, it's a pretty terrible theory because it's very unspecified, but tell me if this description of the world makes a little bit of sense to you. Think of the life world. What's the life world? The life world is what you do at home, making a cup of tea, talking to your members of your family. The life world inside a workplace, it's the life world of the people you're working with. You've got to organize logistics, and there's a team doing this and a team doing that. And then there is the official world, which is increasingly a bullshit world. It's a world which it's not bullshit in the sense that it doesn't do anything, but it's a world in which which is increasing, in which bullshit is increasingly piling up. So if you're in the public service now, you acknowledge the traditional owners when you start every meeting again and again. You have there is sort of mental health things. There are endless kind of performative things going on. And now if people think, well, I'll just sort of issue a little bit of a debugging thing here. I'm not a right-wing person. So this is not antagonistic to the particular causes that are symbolically encoded in all these things, in a thing called Ida Hobbit Day, where one runs around celebrating various things. Now, those things, people in the public service tell me, think of ethics approval. Just think of ethics approval in a university. It's completely unhinged. It's completely mad. You want to do a survey of people, and you might spend months getting ethics approval. There are just layers of this. Now, I'm not appealing here to inefficiency. I'm appealing to the idea that it's kind of a rising level of bullshit. For instance, when you go to a corporate retreat, I mean, I basically feign death to avoid these things, and you get a person standing in front of you saying, we're going to agree on our vision in the next half an hour. And if you put your hand up and say, actually, I think that's not a good idea, that's not a welcome intervention. This is a kind of very soft form of there are very strong messages sent. Now, anyway, Can
I suggest something on this distinction? Because I think you're absolutely onto a distinction, and it crosses over with a totally seemingly
John,
unrelated
let
set of
me. I promise to be very quick, and I'll just finish the point, which is that the amount of bullshit has gone from 10 or 20% of the life world of a workplace to 70 or 80% of the workplace, and we're becoming increasingly careerist. That's my point.
Oh, I agree with that. I think people could also point to a lot of that bullshit world is online. And again, it's not because there's nothing productive online. It's because bullshit is a more effective currency online. But I think I attempted to put my finger on the distinction, and let me know, both of you guys, whether you think this might be it. We used to spend a lot more of our time in circles where reputation mattered. It was a consistent, repeated interactions with your workmates, your neighbors, people who got to know you, and therefore you had an incentive to invest in your reputation. And if you did sufficiently invest in it, you were given trust, and you would be able to say, in a university environment, if you had that trust, it would be easier to get that ethics approval. With your neighbors,
yes, exactly.
Whatever it is you need to achieve. There's the reputational world, and there's the world where we now have the capacity to interact with so many more people, and there's lots of efficiency benefits from that. But one of the downsides are we're not having repeated interactions with the same people. So we're not interacting with people where the reputation really is being directly built. The reputational world and the non-reputational world. And I agree with your point that this what you call the bullshit category, which is a good name for it, or the non-reputational world, it's growing as a percentage of our life. And therefore people who are full of shit are able to get away with much more as well. And it decreased the quality of, I think that is part of what's decreased the quality of politics.
So we're using, I think, John, you and I are kind of quite aligned. We've sort of got fuzzy pictures that are probably pretty similar in our heads, but we're going to try and paint the picture of what they are very differently. Let me paint it in a completely different way. Compare, don't laugh, well, you can laugh. Compare Winston Churchill with Scott Morrison. Now, here's the point that I want to make.
How can we not laugh?
Here is the point that I want to make. Winston Churchill believed that British policy was not facing up to the ugly, the awkward truth of what was going on. And he spent 10 precarious years in the wilderness. And when he was proven right, he became the Prime Minister. And everyone was it wasn't a happy day for most people. Most people thought he'd be a bit of a disaster. I shouldn't personalize it to Scott Morrison. Our political culture is such that our political journalists will talk about politicians repositioning themselves in the matter of 24 hours or walking a thing back or whatever. And it's a kind of language game. It's a soundbite game. It's a talking points game. It's endless. It's relentless. Scott Morrison, having kind of completely screwed up the vaccine rollouts, it goes into interviews saying we're laser. Just goes on and on like that. So this is a very much more bullshit friendly world. And it's a world in which people feel lied to because they are. And of course they blame the politicians, but they might look in the mirror because if the politicians didn't lie to them, they wouldn't be voting for them.
Right. Yeah, sorry about that. Scott Morrison said he was laser focused on, sorry, Nicholas, because I muted you accidentally. I was trying to unmute myself.
I see.
Yes.
I'm not quite sure when that happened, but
it was only for a moment.
It was, yeah. So what you can ask me a question, I'll answer it if you need to have information about Scott Morrison. Scott Morrison, I was just illustrating the way in which politicians do one thing and say the exact opposite, and they're just sort of trying to cover. They're just trying to. So Scott, it would be perfectly reasonable for Scott Morrison to say, "Yes, I've screwed that up. Nobody's perfect, and I'm back onto it." But of course, that's not how
that would work in the world of.
It's not how anything's done.
That would work in the world of reputation. It doesn't work in the world of PR, right? So what he does works for PR, but not reputation.
Yeah, absolutely. And indeed, if you tried what Scott Morrison did in the world of reputation, your reputation goes down because people are saying, well, hang on, you're just telling me stuff that I know is not true.
Can I just one quick addendum, Gene, and then I promise I'll shut up. I know in the world of reputation, it's much more hard to cancel someone on the basis of a slip up or a screw up or something they've got wrong in the past, or because that doesn't undermine their entire reputation. It can undermine their entire PR strategy, but it doesn't undermine their entire reputation with their friends and neighbors and workmates. So the reputational world, I think, was one where we were socially put together in a way more conducive to finding solutions and being nice to each other. But anyway, I'll shut up now, Gene. I've taken up too much time, so go ahead.
That's okay. I was just going to say, I thought Peter Beattie up here, who was Queensland Premier for about 10 years, was very good at actually owning up to things and then, having the trust of the people. I mean, ultimately, I think things sort of got to such a crisis in some of the policy areas that he had to move on. But at least for a while, he was able to do that very well. And
you can do that. You can do that. And my personal view is that it's a better form of politics. I think Scott Morrison, his used by date came quite a bit earlier because he wasn't able to do that. But you can sort of understand it because the journos make such a thing if you concede something. If you say, yes, that was a mistake, that government policy didn't work. I remember coming across a YouTube video of, I think it's James Callaghan, the British Prime Minister. I think he's being interviewed as Prime Minister. And he talks about a particular program in, I think, training and apprentices. And he said, look, we worked away on that for 9 months. And I think it's pretty clear that it hasn't worked out nearly as well as we wanted to. And we're going to try and make some adjustments, and if it doesn't prove itself, we'll have to do something else. That you just don't hear that sort of thing now.
No,
and that would be all over the papers. Prime Minister concedes, blah blah blah.
Well, he was one of the real straight talkers, Callaghan, wasn't he?
He was.
Because he's the one who famously said that you can't spend your way out of a recession. We can't do that
Which is,
anymore.
of course, completely wrong in certain circumstances, but was completely right in the circumstances he was talking about.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so Nicholas, I want to ask you about taxation. So we've had various, given the economic reform roundtable that's coming up, we've got various people coming out arguing, well, what we've got to do is cut company tax. What we've got to do is increase the R&D tax incentives because there's not enough for the larger companies. We had Scott Farquhar the other day come out and say that. Do you have any thoughts on what would your priorities be for first taxation, and then we can talk about other policy measures for productivity?
Okay, so I think that the thing that I've been gunning for years is dividend imputation. A dividend imputation was something which was foisted on Australian policy by Paul Keating's memory of his father's resentment against double taxation. Double taxation, for listeners who don't know, is the company gets taxed, it pays you dividends, and then you pay income tax on that, on those dividends. Now, in principle, that's a silly thing to do. The only thing about tax is that everything we do in tax is a bit silly, because everything we do in tax, almost everything we do in tax, is a bit costly. So it's not a case of. So the real question is, are the costs of doing that? Can you fix up our tax system? Can you get higher growth in less costly ways than fixing that little bug? And around the world, when I last looked at this in detail, the countries that had set up dividend imputation systems, Britain did it through its pension system, Germany did it, they were all undoing it. And there's a simple logic. It may not be that simple to listen to, but I think I can explain it pretty simply, which is that the marginal investor in Australian shares is a foreigner. So most Australians, if they sell some shares, will buy some other Australian shares. Whereas foreign investors in our stock market are about 30% of its capitalization, something like that. Do you guys have a better number? I haven't looked at this stuff for a long time. You happy with that? Anyway, it's a very
that.
substantial. It's a very substantial figure, and as a share of a global portfolio, that 30% of our stock market is 1 or 2%, 3% maybe of a balanced global portfolio. Now imagine if the tax take on Australian companies goes down. You can imagine we might go from 3% to 4% or 5% of that massive global pool. Whereas if the tax take on Australian shareholders goes down, they're 70% of the index and it's 40% of their money, then they might take it out and put it in housing. They might, but if you lower their tax rate, there isn't a vast reservoir of possible investment that you can attract. And what we've done with dividend imputation is that we've actually gone to great lengths to stop foreigners benefiting from dividend imputation, to keep it to local taxpayers. So it's a perfect form of the economically efficient thing to do is to discriminate in favour of foreign shareholders, and dividend imputation discriminates against them. And I like to put it in another way, which is I'll give you $30 billion of tax expenditure. You're allowed to make the Australian government's tax receipts $30 billion less, but you can't. So you've got to make our tax take in company tax $30 billion lower, but you can't lower the cost of capital. It's hard to do, but we've done it.
Right. So you're obviously you don't think the system's been a success. And what would you prefer to do? We get rid of dividend imputation. We just cut the company tax rate substantially.
Yeah. And that means you'll get some pensioners if they're kind of, if they can look through all this, they can see that their tax rate goes up a little bit. Foreigners' tax goes down, and foreign investment goes up substantially.
I'll play devil's advocate again. This is something I've been toying with a little bit. What I'm about to get to. I should stop introducing myself that way. But so I agree. What you're suggesting is a system that the current system has a higher capital tax for foreigners than for Australians, and you're suggesting that's a mistake because foreigners' capital is more elastic. If that's a correct summary.
Yeah, you put it better.
I don't deny any of that. Some part of me wonders on a different front whether domestic capital ownership is a sufficiently important thing that, and this is not very libertarian of me to say, this is not very free market of me to say, but if domestic capital ownership is of sufficient importance, especially long term, when we're turning into a world where increasingly there's more and more reliance on capital income, I suspect, as we're going forward as a species.
On capital inflow. On capital inflow.
Capital income. No, the income earned from capital owned.
Good. Yeah.
And I would like it that Australians had a decent amount of capital ownership, which is potentially what I'm saying here is the sacrilege of economists to say that perhaps it's not the total capital stock that matters, and they would have a higher capital stock with your system, I agree, or at least shifting towards a non-discriminatory company tax system. But if my goal is maximizing domestic capital ownership so that it's Australians who are getting capital income in the future, then I actually need that. You say the elasticity for domestic investors might be lower, but I want to be pushing on that. The behavioral change that I want to see out of this is greater domestic savings turning into greater domestically owned capital, and therefore greater capital income for Australians, as opposed to more capital income for Saudis, Chinese, Americans, whoever it is that's investing that marginal dollar.
Yeah,
I'm not sure what comes from that thought bubble, but that's the potential asterisk that comes to mind. Following your comments.
Yeah, all I'd say is, I mean, there's something in what you say, but then you would craft a policy around that, not make it the justification for a shitty policy elsewhere. So, I mean, I would imagine that if you want Australians to be larger owners of capital, you want a fair bit of their investments to be going offshore anyway.
Yeah, well, I don't think we're going to be able to change the international interest rates, where we might be able to change the domestic return on investment. If there's less foreign investors, then there's going to be a higher rate of return on capital for the Australians that can own the Australian stocks.
There's a higher rate of return, which is a higher cost of capital.
Yes, so that's going to lead to higher costs for consumers. Is your point there, I assume, or?
Well, no,
or for
it's a more capital starved
for the people,
economy.
I guess. So that's feeling sad for the business people, but I'm feeling more sad for the savers.
I'm not
that's
sad about
focus of my
anyone. I'm just
behaviour.
talking about what is a richer Australia, and a richer Australia's got more
Well,
capital. It's got a larger capital base.
Yes, but then where does the proceeds of that wealth go? Because if the proceeds of that is in income going overseas again, then it's a GDP instead of a GNP.
At a lower cost of capital.
Yeah, no, I've got that. So, so you're going to have more capital in the economy with your system. I agree, but a big chunk of that's going to be owned by foreigners. And I guess maybe this is a flaw of me. I put a lower utility weighting on the value of the utility functions of those foreigners than I do of the utility functions of the Australians.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting thing to think about. I think I wouldn't want to try and think about it without a kind of a model, because, I mean, you're appealing to this idea of paying the foreigners, and I think that's a relevant thing to think about. And I got to concede, I haven't thought about that properly. So we better do that together sometime, because what I'm saying is I'm treating payments to Australians and payments to foreigners who have gifted us a whole lot of money as equivalent, and there are models in which that is wrong. And there are models in which it's right. So I'm implicitly assuming the models in which it's right, and so we just have to be more specific about the nature of your argument, I think, John.
Yeah, and I think, John, wouldn't the standard argument be that, well, we want the foreign capital because it lifts the capital to labour ratio, and doesn't that increase the wages? Increase productivity.
Yeah, we don't get zero benefit from foreign investment. I grant you that. We get benefit from two ways. One is the increased competition for labour, hopefully, inshallah, if it's the sort of capital that is in a labour-intensive area, which it's not always. And the other one is we get a tax cut, right? So there are two benefits you get from foreign capital, but we don't get the return on capital to an Australian. And so then you've got to do this trade-off. Would it be worth having slightly less capital if we do get a greater return on that investment domestically kept? Anyway, and as Nicholas has said, it's to some degree a modelling question, which none of us came here prepared with any modelling answers to it. But I can see Nicholas's argument, and for a long time it was mine, and it might still be mine. This is just this little devil on my shoulder, or angel, if it's correct.
No, it's good. Well, I'm happy to go the other way too. So we'll just have to, we're both prepared to be proven wrong.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of pressure to lower the company tax rate, because there's a general recognition our company tax rate's much higher than in other countries, isn't it? I mean, you probably know the numbers off the top of your head, John, but they have typically 15 to 20% or something versus our 30 for corporates. So,
and can I just repeat here for the camera what I said to you on Monday, Gene? A piece of anecdotal evidence that I'd use in favor of the idea that our dividend imputation system has worked fairly well is that we have one of the highest by a long way, like much higher than most other countries, company tax system. And the
company tax rates. Company tax rates, yes. And also revenue from company tax, yeah.
No, you're right, but that's the point I'm going to. So we have a very high company tax rate. Where we know from the tax data that the behavioural response to that capital tax is much higher than the behavioural response to labour taxes. And yet we've got away with this, what seems like on paper, an insanely high company tax rate with one of the best performing economies over the last 30 or 40 years. It indicates to me that there's something hidden somewhere in our company tax system, which I think is the dividend imputation system.
I'll tell you what it is. It's not that hidden. There's a lot of people boasting about it in Treasury and so on, or they were when I was talking to them about these things, and that is that it's a implicit resource rent tax, and it's it's a rent tax. So Australia's full of rent, resource rent, but also oligopolistic rent. And that's one of the reasons why Treasury, this is maybe being too generalizing too heroically, but generally my recollection is that Treasury hasn't been particularly keen on reducing the company rate, at least, and it was one of the reasons why it backed and then buggered up resource rent tax, because I think in that context it would be much more favourably disposed to cutting tax. There's also, of course, the ACE taxation. That again, taxing cash flows, then taxes rents, and so that's something else that we should be trying to do, but it's hard.
So ACE is the allowance for corporate equity, is it?
Yeah, that's right.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So you allow, just as you allow people to write off the costs of debt, they write off the costs of getting in the equity. That means your tax rates have to go up a lot because people are getting much larger deductions. It was quite amusing. The Business Council thought it was went to some important high-level tax thing. I don't know exactly when it was, in the 2000s, and said, well, maybe, and they wanted big, bold reform, and they said maybe we should have an ACE tax. And of course, their members crunched the numbers. They're the rent takers of the Australian world, Woolworths, Coles, the banks, and they decided maybe it wasn't such a good idea.
Well, as always, devil's in the detail, right? There's different ways you can structure those.
And the minors.
Yeah. Nicholas, what about innovation policy, innovation tax settings? So you were involved with a Cutler review of innovation back in 08, 09. And, there was a change in the tax policy settings there from the previous R&D tax concession. We made it refundable.
Yeah.
And, I mean, a lot of startups appear to rely upon that now, so it could be seen as a bit of a success, I suppose. And now Scott Farquhar is saying that it's not doing enough for the larger businesses that have more to spend on R&D. It's because of the way that it's structured. Do you have any thoughts on that?
That'd be Scott Farquhar, who runs a larger than usual company, wouldn't it?
Yes, yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, I've got to tell you that the R&D tax concession was another one of these Australian-owned goals. So so it was just breathtakingly silly the way we designed it, which was that it's a tax. You got it. It forgives you tax once you get to pay tax. Can you think of a sillier way to help startups who are not in profit and won't be in profit? If they're a good startup, they won't be in profit for a long time. That's how we chose to help startups. And owing to some things that the Howard government did, and then we did subsequently in the Rudd era, these credits were made refundable, and that was a very worthwhile thing. I tried to get those credits paid quarterly because often cash flow is the thing. It's not so much profitability, it's just cash flow. And I had a sort of a 3-year duel with Treasury and the tax office, really. Treasury kind of got it. They weren't supportive of me, but they weren't actively trying to undermine the policy. But tax office won. In the end, they snuck something into a Senate committee, and we didn't get that. We didn't get that up. So I think the tax concession has been on balance a pretty good thing. It's been good at helping small companies. I'm a bit concerned that it is an entitlement scheme which has lawyers crawling all over it. So you have so it's tax law that is the interface between, or it's administered through tax law, not through the normal processes of administration. So you're constantly running these long battles with large corporates. And when I was doing this review in the Cutler review in 2008 on to 2014, the miners were finding ways to classify major drag lines, major investments as technically risky. So if there was some bit of geology these are $100 million, $600 million expenditures, all written off using the or large parts of which are written off using the tax concession. So the tax officials are constantly battling this. I don't know enough to know whether the Canadian system, which is much more discretionary and has bureaucrats, the companies apply. It's a pretty generous scheme, I imagine. My knowledge on this is a bit out of date as well, but it was a pretty generous scheme, but it wasn't built around tax entitlements. I can see in principle benefits and problems with that. So on balance, I'm not thinking that it's terribly important for us to increase tax benefits to this thing for larger companies. You want to, I mean, they get instant write-off. That's quite a lot given the nature of the expenditure as an investment. What we're not much good at, and again, it's one of these many things that almost nobody's good at least this is an area where some people are good at it, where almost nobody's good at good collaboration between research organisations and universities and business. Australia's terrible at it, enduringly, resiliently terrible at it. Maybe we could try and do some things there, but it's not at all easy to know what to do. And to do it, you would need to mess with the institutions. You can't just if you take universities as given and just give them incentives, they're just after money. They're after money and citations, and they're not. They're completely hollowed out with managerialism, and that's what academics are rewarded for, and it's a nightmare. So it's a hard problem, and I'm not sure what could be done about it.
Right. So is this part of fixing up our productivity problem, fixing up what's wrong with universities?
Oh, well, sure. But I mean, that's no one's talking about that. And I don't even want to claim that I know how to do it. I do know that they're failing institutions. They're in a terrible state. They just do so many dysfunctional things. Ethics approval's one. The citation system of rewards is absurd. I mean, of course, you can kind of see the logic, but that's it. And I mean, it's just extraordinary that everyone knows how bad the problem is with p-hacking and harking and all of these things. Salami slicing, there are lots of good names for all the different practices. And of course, in a competitive system, the longer this goes on, the more the people who are doing it for the right reasons feel like complete mugs, and they go off and try and get decent lives. But I just find it completely extraordinary. Not that universities generally try to, position themselves in these metrics and these, they're constantly telling you they're 51st in the world or something. Not that a lot of them do it, but that absolutely no universities that I know of, including universities that have got endowments of tens of billions of dollars, not one has said, actually, most of this is a disaster, and here is what we're going to try and do to do good work and to reward good work. And it actually gets back to what John was talking about reputations. To try to build reputations, not on the sand of metrics and tricks and gaming, but on the bona fide opinion of one's peers, not through some incredibly degraded institution like peer review, where a hell of a lot of peer review is now being spat out of AIs. You can. I know someone who had got some comments on their paper. It wasn't a negative. There were some negatives, some positives. It wasn't so it's not sour grapes. It's going to be published, but he was pretty confident that what he got was AI driven. And so one of the comments was that it needed an appendix, and his paper had an appendix.
Hmm.
And this
We hear about the students using AI to game the system, and now we're actually getting the not just the academics, but the reviewers of the academics.
The whole thing.
Look,
And I mean, AI. We're no strangers to AI. We've been running AI for a generation without the computers. I mean, we've just been churning this stuff out. AI is. I mean, I'm a huge fan of what you can do with ChatGPT and things like that, but the default is bullshit. I mean, that's how it generates what it does. It sort of triangulates this vast mass of text. And
look, I grant you the artificial is there. It's the jury is out on whether the intelligence is there to match the artificial.
Well,
but
there's something there.
comment out of the way. I think I did want to give a shout out when you were saying, because I agree the university system's busted. I'm probably more radical and taking a different direction to you. I think the whole system has got the credentialism is inflated all out of proportion.
Yeah.
And I think it's causing significant social damage. But that aside, you say that where are the universities who are attempting this? I just wanted to give a really quick little shout out to our friend Paul Freiters, who's doing something in this space. I don't know if it'll work, but he's trying to set up something which is in an entirely different structure of tertiary education. I think it's called Libera.
Yeah, no. I've seen it. He's in a castle, and he's getting people with a decent amount of money to come and do. To try to have an exciting, different kind of education. And I've had long conversations with Paul about this before he set that up. And good on him, of course. But that's why I said, he's. But
it is vanishingly rare. It's the exception that proves the rule.
But there'd be 100 of those. There would be 100 of those around the world. There's the University of Oxford, of Austin, or whatever it's called. There are various. There's a frisson of people, but there's no university that says, look, we've got this huge amount of revenue. Here's our plan. We know it's a bit risky, but where the hell are we going? I'm thinking I nearly did. It turned out that they couldn't get their act together, but I did I was engaged in going to one of these stupid corporate retreats with the University of Newcastle. And, what a fantastic thing for the University of, great weather. You could attract really world-class people who, some of whom might not immediately get lots of publications and drive you up the ladder. But you could come out and say, that's actually not what we're trying to do. We're trying to get at least 20 extraordinary researchers here. And this is how we're going to work out what an extraordinary researcher is. And it'll be someone who other researchers in the field, via a secret ballot or something, and we might even get to talk about some of these things when we talk about some of these ideas that I've been developing in democracy. It's not hard to sketch out an exciting shot at the stumps, and Australia would be well placed to do this because it's a nice place to live. Great, that's a great starting point.
Good luck convincing them to take the risk. But
no, I'm not. Don't worry. I'm not trying.
Given we're coming up to an hour, Gene, that could be a good chance to segue to Nicholas's. I don't want to call it your pet topic. I don't know if that counts, but it's one of your maybe one of the ideas for which you're more famous or infamous.
The citizens' juries. I think it'd be good to, if we could ask you about what you see as how could we implement citizens' juries in Australia? What's the next steps to getting one up and helping us with various issues? I mean, I'm starting to think we might need one up here for the Olympics in Brisbane, given all the debate about where to put the venues and what the likely costs are.
Yeah.
And what are your plans with citizens' juries?
So let me tell you how my support of this is different to most of the people I know. So most of the people that I know who are promoting citizen juries, they promote citizen juries as a kind of cool thing. There's a sort of a sentimental attachment to the fact that they're real ordinary people. And there's also a sense that the electoral democracy is letting us down. But I guess I have looked at this for many, many years, and I've gradually come to a kind of quite a simple set of propositions. And the way I have put this is that there are two ways firstly, democracy is a three-legged stool. We have every democracy we know of, pretty much every one, I can't think of an exception, has three legs on this stool. One is direct democracy. In Athens, that was the assembly. They had debates and people made decisions and so on. In modern democracies, that's the vote. So everyone has a direct input. And then there is representative democracy. Now, everyone thinks of representative democracy as electoral democracy. My point is that is Aristotle's point, if I might be permitted to say so. He was a national treasurer, I believe, and he points out that these two mechanisms, election and the way we choose juries, which is by lottery, that they are profoundly different. How are they different? Well, Aristotle calls electoral democracy aristocracy, partly because electoral, in some sense, is about choosing the best, at least the best in terms of, well, that's a bit of a laugh these days, but at least the person who is most favoured in the vote. But it does two other things that are just incredibly important. One is it separates the governed from the governing. So it is a mechanism to give the governed the sense that there is consent, that they are consenting to the government. And that sense might be a good sense or it might be a bad sense, but that's what it does. And the other thing that it does is that it anchors a great deal of politics in rhetoric, a great deal of politics in spin, a great deal of politics in words that are used to persuade or manipulate. And we are simply disappearing under the professionalization, the optimization, the endless rehearsal of that. And representation by lottery is just utterly different. So I don't support it because it's got more ordinary people in it, and I don't support it because ordinary people are better than politicians, because I don't really think they are. I think it's incredibly valuable because those things that I've just identified with electoral democracy are not present. So as Aristotle put it, selection by lot is people taking turns in governing and being governed. Big deal. When you look at a jury, what is the dramaturgy, if I've used the word correctly? What's the psychology of the space in which a jury sits? It is us. It is the psychology of, that person is either guilty or not, and we have to decide if they're guilty or not. It's not, right, well, what do I want and what do they want and who's going to win this contest? That can happen inside a jury, but that's not what's framed. And finally, it's not a rhetorical contest. Again, it can, there can be smarties in the jury who are good with words. Often they don't do all that well because there is a sense of solidarity among people. But it's tremendously sort of centering, sanity-inducing process. It's also hugely incorruptible. It's famous throughout the ages as being the hardest system to corrupt because God chose who was the jurors. In other words, the dice chose who the jurors were. And they're only going to be jurors for a while and then someone else will be.
Yeah, so how do we implement it? How could we use this to complement or do we use it to take the analysis, or what comes out of this productivity roundtable? So Jim Chalmers is getting the great and the good together in Canberra in a few weeks' time. People like Danielle Wood and heads of the Business Council, Aki, etc., various others to talk about productivity.
Yep.
Would the citizens' jury, you see this with, you randomly select Australians to give them a chance to sit on a citizens' jury. Would they deliberate on what's good for our productivity? Would they deliberate on what's coming out of the citizens' jury?
So this is where we get to another kind of fork in the road. Most people like the idea of special purpose citizen juries. They often spend a lot of time negotiating with governments to fund and to have them. And then the citizen jury will sit on a particular thing. It will provide recommendations to the government, and then the government takes the recommendations and has committed to responding to the recommendations. That's kind of it. And that becomes a kind of, I call that an issue, that becomes an issues management situation for the government. I think it's good if those things happen, but I'm not very optimistic about them. And I think there's good evidence for that. People have been doing that for 15 years. And they rehearse the very idea that the government is there to receive supplications from the community and to decide what it wants to do. So I'm trying to forge what I call an activism of sortition, a way for the community to start getting into this way of governing. Obviously, the community has no legislative power, so you can't start with an empowered citizen jury. But imagine if some philanthropists in Queensland and maybe from further afield simply parted with the necessary $500,000 to run a standing citizen assembly to deliberate on the question of the Olympics in Sydney. That would have a reasonable amount. That would have a reasonable amount of influence on the decisions that were made, and it would showcase the fact that people actually perform pretty well in this situation, and decisions get made in a very different sort of way. Because what happens, the way we do things at the moment, is that powerful people tend to get their way and the less powerful people resent them for it. And in these kinds of situations, a little more social, there's a little more kind of implied equality. There's a little more social pressure on the powerful people. And for instance, I'm told by YIMBY advocates, I identify as one, but I'm not across it. Haven't got a lot of experience there, but I'm told by YIMBY associates that if you have citizen juries making zoning decisions and planning decisions, it's about 25% more development friendly. So it's also quite noticeably more focused on the long term. It's more, as you would expect from basic incentives, it's more focused on environmental outcomes. For example, in a process like this, it was a deliberative poll, which is very similar to a citizen jury, run by George W. Bush, believe it or not, when he was governor of Texas in 1999, I think it was, and it was on energy, the future for energy in Texas. Going in, from memory, 54% people were asked, would you pay a small amount more for your electricity for it to be renewable? And it was very, it was 5% or 2% or something. And 54% of people said yes. That was going in. Coming out, something like 82% of people said yes. And I happen to think that it's that the greenhouse challenge that the world has faced really should have been a walk in the park. It's 1 or 2% of GDP over 30 or 40 years. And if this type of mechanism was running things, people would have said, yeah, well, of course we should do that. Let's do it for a while, and let's watch this space and see what we need to do in 5 years or 10 years time. But it's much more easy. It's much easier to put money in to white ant the whole process, make everyone think that scientists are on the take and all that kind of stuff.
I was very curious to hear you say that there's some evidence about the impact of citizen juries on development approvals. Where did that come from? Where do we have case studies? Is anyone?
It came from a guy called Jonathan O'Brien who told it to me, and he's in. I can put you in touch with him, and maybe he'll say I've misquoted him, but that's what he said to me.
I mean, it's got to be true, John, because I mean, all the opposition to development proposals comes from the locals who are worried about all the extra cars in the neighbourhood. Or
and the juries weren't also coming from the same.
Well, no, my understanding, and this is where you need to talk to the source, but my understanding is that the juries were from the local area, but the people in the local area who matter more are the people with the money.
Yeah, I'd be very interested to see that, if we can track down who or what, if there's any studies, if anyone's actually pursuing it. I wonder if any states in Australia are pursuing that. That'd be interesting to see.
I doubt it, but they might be. They might be. But well, you could. But the sort of thing you could do. The sort of thing you could do. Yeah, the sort of thing you could do.
Something beautiful, gentlemen. We could be starting it here right now.
That's right. That's right. So you can imagine, the Minns government, the government here in Victoria, government in Queensland, they're all trying to get more houses built, and they have lots of trouble along these lines. So it might easily work very well for them to have a citizen, to have a body like this, to provide a trusted source of information about what the considered opinion of the people is, as opposed to their opinion when you poke a microphone in their face when they're walking out of a supermarket. That's roughly the way we do public opinion at the moment.
Indeed.
Interesting. Can I just a thought, Bob? I for a long time I've been sympathetic to the idea, as it's been pitched to me. It's like something like the Senate by sortation, right? To have a body that was determined by sortition, or lottery instead of election. So the idea's been floating around for a while, and I've always been somewhat sympathetic, especially if you have that contrasted two different bodies, one elected, one by sortition. Then you've got this creative tension, and potentially it weeds out all the dumbest ideas. But so I'm not new to the idea, and I'm very sympathetic. I was just trying to sit here thinking devil's advocate stuff again, because I apologize. I'm just an asshole. That's what I do. But it occurred to me that I think you're right. It's got sort of better internal incentives, less incentive to game the system. Probably got more of the reputational effect of people dealing with each other in that group once they're elected. But they potentially have less incentive to worry about their long-term reputation from this. They don't need to get re-elected. They don't need to get resortitioned. So they could potentially just throw out the future and go mad. And when a politician's going to go mad, the check on them is saying, "Oh, you're not going to get re-elected if you go too mad." I'm wondering if this is one of the potential downsides. And no system's perfect. It might be a smaller downside than the downside of elections. But is there a problem that they're not invested in the long-term outcome because they don't need re-election?
Well, most people are far more invested in long-term outcomes than politicians are. Most people care about their kids. Most people who don't have kids still think that it's kind of a good thing to care about the long term. And it was one of the many little discoveries I made as I slowly pondered these matters over the last couple of decades. This is another recent discovery of mine that, well, firstly, we have this wonderful Teflon word, which is accountability, which we're all in favor of. And yet what's going wrong in the world is that we keep having pretend accountability, and we're actually right up, our faces are right up against the fact that you can't hold people perfectly accountable. Accountability always comes with all kinds of slippage in it, slippage which increasingly favors the powerful. And the system of accountability for CEOs is drafted by the corporate lawyers in such a way that they never end up accountable. So here was my big insight. Juries are not accountable, and that's a feature, not a bug. that's the buck stops there, and we say to people, we want you to behave well, and we're just going to leave it to you to decide whether you behave well or not. Almost everyone does. Almost everyone gets an incredible buzz out of that situation. And where there are people who behave badly, who there must be, well, in a jury, we've got 12, and there might be 1 or 2, and we can still get the right result out of the jury. And further, if there is a rogue in the jury, if people behave badly in the jury, then the group is usually pretty well placed to deal with that. And it's dealt with that. We began this discussion talking about the life world. A jury institutionalizes a little life world for people where they can, nobody's going to dox them. Nobody's going to listen to the word they said and blast it out on Twitter because they chose the wrong, they chose an out-of-date word about a sensitive topic, and so on and so forth. So I would say that this is all feature, very little bug, and that we should realize, of course, accountability is a good thing. And we've way overdone our accountability. We're kind of accountability neurotics. We keep setting up these systems of accountability that are not systems of accountability. I'm looking at you, NAC, the NACC. I'm looking at you, ASIC. I'm looking at you, universities and scientific fraud, and if not sort of blatant scientific fraud, then just scientific mediocrity. That's what our institutions have become. That's what accountability has done. Accountability should be relatively light and should create space for people to be their best selves. And bureaucratic systems of accountability have been killing that off since I've been in short pants.
Yeah.
It occurred to me as I was asking it that our original conversation.
Devil's advocate about next, John? Sorry, go on.
No, this was an agreement. It occurred to me when I was asking that part of the answer might be the first topic that we sat down to speak about. That the drawing people from an area out of the meat space to meet IRL, and then have that sort of. You mentioned a word before. I was trying to remember it. I can't bring it to mind. But this reputational space, and also, Jean, you said that they're directly invested in the outcome. It does make me think that these solutions lend themselves more readily to situations where the jury is being drawn from a location, and that location is the one that's going to be primarily impacted by the decision. Like this, it seems to me that localism is a helpful feature of such structures.
I can't see why.
So that ensures, because if you have a very good jury from Queensland deciding on what to happen in that Tasmanian stadium, now we can all get down together and trust each other, but at the end of the day, we don't have to fear the concern of the wrong decision there, because all of the costs and all the benefits.
Oh, okay. So you're arguing the opposite. So you're arguing the opposite of localism. You're arguing
I'm not arguing for that.
Queensland jurors would do a better job than Tasmanian jurors.
I'm not. I'm saying it should be drawn. It should be drawn from Tasmanians because they are going to be directly, personally invested in the outcome of that deliberation. They're going to have to live with the consequences, whether they're good or bad.
Yeah, but that's true.
Live with the consequences.
That's right, but that would be true about American tax law, which should, if you wanted a jury to have some say on it, which I would, then it should be an American jury. It should be from all the states, so yes, there needs to be a correspondence between the community that it affects, but it's not a localism story, it's a representativeness story.
Yeah, I'm not throwing shade on the idea of doing it at a state or national level. And this is just vibe, so I should go and check what the literature is. My instinct is that it seems to me this would work very well at a local level. And now that's not to say it can't work at a state or national level. But more of those incentives align at a local level. So I'm on a big localism push.
I don't know what you mean, John. When you have a citizen assembly on same-sex marriage, all the people in the Irish Citizen Assembly on same-sex marriage that they were the population that would be affected by the outcome. So that that would have to be a national one. But I mean, with localism, it's to do with the it's to do with the mapping between who's affected and who's on the jury.
Yeah, well, it just depends what the issue is, right? So if it's a national law, obviously the nation's affected. But if it's whether to have a new development just outside of Gympie, then people from Wagga Wagga aren't very affected. So maybe a jury coming from near Gympie would be the right jury. And it seems to me that the incentives align even better if you've got a high probability that you're going to be walking through the direct. You and your neighbours are facing the direct full benefits and costs, not benefits and costs dispersed amongst the entire population of the nation.
And
it's all on you and your neighbours.
And it's a better way. So take infrastructure, which is long, that's a long timelines involved there. So juries are much more likely to try to take in all the long-term costs and benefits than politicians, and they're not very interested in rhetorical tricks whereby every elected politician, including many of the independents, have to speak as if taxes are bad and spending is good. Well, that's ridiculous, but that's what they all have to do it. So it's a terrible system.
All right, I think we're on a unity ticket there. So yes, I think we've taken so much of your time, Nicholas. It's been amazing. Yes, and John, provocative as always.
It was good. Yeah, it was fun, I think.
Very good. Excellent.
Gene, I don't know. Gene, I know you prepared a bunch of other topics. We have hit an hour.
We'll do it again then.
If you guys have had enough.
I'm being buzzed for dinner, so we'll do it again.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll have to do it again sometime.
Do it tomorrow night if you want.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Well, we try to do these each Thursday, but if you're keen to come back,
I'm happy to just keep going. It might be you might regret it, but there'll be plenty more things I can talk about.
I will definitely get you back then.
Okay.
All right then. So thank you very much, Nicholas, for joining us. Now I know you've got a Substack. Do you have any other places people can find you?
Yes, they can find me on Substack. They can find me on Twitter. There's a sort of legacy blog that I continue to contribute to called Club Troppo. It used to be, those were glory days it used to be one of Australia's premier 4 or 5 political blogs, or blogs about politics and culture. So those are the main things. If people want to email me, they can do that, and they can find out how to email me on the internet.
All right, excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you, Nicholas.
Okay.
Gene, thank you.
Thanks, John.
As always. And for those listening at home, thank you for joining us. We do try to do this each Thursday at 7:30. I say try, I don't make a promise, because as you will have noticed, we don't always make it for various reasons. But 7:30 on the Thursdays, you'll normally find Gene and me here either to have our own rant or to bring on a guest or an interview, which I enjoy those. So we should, we had Cam Murray on a couple of weeks ago as well, and that was quite a free-flowing session. So I quite enjoy these. But anyway, for those listening at home, you can find us, as I said before, on the Facebook, the X, and the YouTubes. Please go to those places. The Australian Taxpayers Alliance. You can find me there as well, John Humphreys. You can find Gene on a couple of them. I'm not sure if he's on everything, but you can find him on X anyway. And thank you for tuning in. And until next week, stay safe. Have fun.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.